All right, so in today's demonstration, I'm going to walk you guys through how to animate this little spider monster for our 5th project in this class. And so you can follow along today if you'd like to. You can just download the assignment file in the Unit 5 folder, or you can just sit back and watch and then go back and work on this on your own time. So next week will be a work week for this assignment, and then we'll just see how it goes after that. I think I'm going to throw in another little quick, just fun assignment. So, and that will just serve as bonus points. So if there's something that you didn't get full credit on for a previous assignment, and you don't want to go back and revise it, you just want to, focus on learning something new, you can use that next assignment as bonus points. So this is an example of what we're shooting for today. So we have this little spider monster. It has 6 legs, and as you can see, it swings from this web and then drops itself to the ground, and then scampers off into the foreground. And so there are several things that are animated. Obviously, the swinging of the spider, all the legs are moving, and the shadow beneath the spider is also animated to move with the spider when it swings back and forth, and also to scale and move into the foreground when the spider gets closer to us in the foreground. So I'm going to walk you through the steps of how to do this. So when you first open your document, it's going to look like this. So you'll just see the shadow on the floor of the stage. We've got 3 layers already in the layers window, but they are empty. So you can see that we have blank keyframes and blank frames because we don't have any content there yet. So how do we get from there to the example that I just had up? Well, we are going to animate this spider in stages. And so it's going to consist of animating 1 leg, and then nesting that animation into a symbol, and then dragging 3 legs over and nesting that animation into a symbol. We'll set the looping frame, this looping starting frame for each leg so that we'll have a staggered movement. Where's my little example here? Did I shut it down, or I thought I still had it up? I guess I closed it. Anyway, so the legs had a staggered movement. And then we just continue to nest these animations together in new symbols until we have created a fully animated spider that functions as one grouped object that's already animated. All right, and then we will attach it to the web, and then we will animate the web just like we did the vine in the previous demonstration video or demonstration file. So let's get started with animating the leg. So let's look in our library window and just check out what we have. We have one movie clip symbol that's called foot. We have one that's called leg. We have one that's called shadow, which is already out there on the stage, and then web segment. Oh, sorry, monster body too. And we're not quite ready for the monster body. So we're going to drag over onto the stage, and I'm just going to do this on the legs layer. Drag a foot over and a leg over. I'm going to put these 2 together. And then I'm going to attach a bone structure to these leg segments. So I'll start at the top of the leg segment and drag it to the top of the foot segment. Now I'll use my selection tool to just kind of test out the articulation, see if it's what I like. I might move these segments a little bit closer together so there's not as much separation. So to do that, after you've already applied a bone structure, is to hold down the Option or Alt key and click and drag on that particular bone, and you can reset it. Well, it's not working out too hot for me right now for some reason. Okay, you actually have to grab it at the, where the end of that bone segment is. And then I'm going to test this out again and see if I like the movement. And I think that works pretty good. So now it's time to set the pose, or the poses, for this the movement of this leg. So we have 15 frames already set out for us in the timeline. And so we'll just use this space to animate this leg. So we want to make sure the playhead is all the way at the beginning of the timeline. And then we're going to set up the first pose for the leg. And I think that just this 90-degree angle works fine for the first pose. And then I'm going to move the playhead out to maybe the 5th frame. And I will select the leg by the top bone structure and just lift it up in the air. So this kind of is reminiscent of the olive crusher arm. Okay, so it's the same kind of animated movement that we're creating with this. So there's our second pose, and it never hurts to just test it out real quick. Make sure you like that movement, and then move on to the next place in the timeline where you'd like to set the next pose. So I'm going to move my playhead to about frame 10, and in this pose the leg is going to come out and it's going to kind of stretch out just a little bit, just like that. And I'm operating it just by the foot segment and not quite the leg segment. And then I'm just going to test this out real quick. So it kind of stretches out, and then the very last frame I'm going to bring that leg back in. And there we have it. How's that working for everybody? Pretty simple. One leg down, 5 more to go. We're not going to animate each leg individually, though. We're going to do this just like we did the olive crusher. So we're going to nest this animation into a symbol, and then we will create a new, or get started on creating a new animated symbol by dragging 3 animated legs over and setting the starting frame for the looping so that we have a staggered movement. And then we'll also do a little bit of manipulation of those other instances of symbols that we drag over so that we create this kind of illusion of depth. So we'll probably adjust the brightness at the level of the instance, maybe even the scaling a little bit, just like we did with the olive crusher arms. Okay, so the next step will be to now turn this into an animated symbol. So we've animated something on the stage, and it's just animated at the level of this particular layer, and we want this to behave like one grouped object. So we're going to select the animation in the timeline. So how I just did that was I held the shift button down, clicked on the first frame, and then with that shift button held down, I went to the very last frame and clicked again, and I was able to select all of that animation in the timeline. And so now that I have that highlighted like you see here, I'm going to right click or control click anywhere inside this selected area of animation, and I'm going to cut these frames. So you'll see it disappear from the stage, and then we're going to create a brand new symbol to paste this animation into. So we'll go to Insert, New Symbol, and let's go ahead and give it a name. So we want to call it Animated Leg, just singular. And this is going to be a graphic symbol, all right? So remember, when you place a bone structure onto these separate objects, they have to be movie clips. But once we nest that animation into a new symbol, that symbol will be a graphic symbol. And then we're going to just paste our, let's just paste them in the timeline. So control click and paste frames. And there we have it. I did cut frames. So you want to actually cut them from scene 1 from the main stage so that you can paste them into the new symbols editing stage. So you'll notice that, you know, if you'll remember, symbols have their own animating stage where with its own timeline where you can assemble objects and and animate them within that symbol.
A graphic symbol?
Yes, it will be a graphic symbol. All right, so now that we've done that, our work is done as far as making that one symbol. So I'm going to hit the back button to go back to scene 1. And now I will drag over my animated leg symbol onto the stage and just test it out, make sure it's moving the way I want it to. And now it's time to create another animated symbol with 3 legs. And we're going to do this by just reusing this one animated leg symbol. So we're going to drag it over to the stage. And I find it helpful when I do this part to go ahead and drag over the monster body, even though it's not going to be a part yet of this animated symbol. But this way I can gauge the positioning and the size of the legs, how I have them stacked. So it kind of helps me to see it in relationship to the spider monster body. Now I'm using the free transform tool to do a lot of my selecting of these animated legs. So the leg that's in the foreground, I'm going to scale that up. I'm going to hold the shift key down and scale it up a little bit. I'm going to grab one more animated leg symbol and drag it over. And this one's going to be stacked in front of the one that I just scaled up. So I'm going to scale this one up to be a little bit larger than this one that's going to end up being in the middle. That's going to give us a kind of an appearance of depth. I'm going to bring this monster to the foreground. You can. I'm really just using it just for helping me place the legs the way I want them placed. So it really doesn't matter at this point where the body of the spider monster goes. So I think it'll be, probably positioned something like this in the final spider monster. So I want, the leg part of the spider legs to be tucked behind the monster. And when I move the legs, I don't really want it, hanging down. But I can position that later. So right now my focus is just to get these legs arranged. So now I have 3 legs and they're kind of scaled, in kind of stair-stepping sizes. And they're all, animated in unison right now, but we're going to reset the starting frame for the looping on this. And we're going to do a few other things too. So I'm just I don't really need the spider monster just yet. So I'll just move it to the side. And I'm going to select the first symbol in the foreground. And I'll go to the properties window and I'm going to just make a few color effect adjustments. So to get that window to come up, make sure that you do tap on that symbol to bring those options up, and you'll see color effects is available. And I'm going to click the drop down menu and I'm going to choose brightness. And I'm going to increase the brightness of this one. So that looks pretty good. And then I'll click on the next symbol. I might leave that one just the way it is. I'm going to go straight to the back one. and make that one a little bit darker. So they look like they're kind of receding away from us in space. All right, and now I'm going to just delete the monster body from the stage. And I'm going to select on the layer that I assembled the legs on. I'm going to select the frames in that timeline. And I'll control click and cut frames again. And you'll see all those legs disappear. And I'm going to create a new symbol. So I'll go to Insert in the menu bar, choose New Symbol. And this one is going to be called Animated Legs, plural. So, and it'll be a graphic symbol. And then just hit the OK button. And now let's paste that animation, or paste the frames into this symbol. And this is where we're going, and we could have done this at the stage level before we cut the animation and pasted it into the symbol, but we're going to set the looping rate for each leg so that they'll have a staggered movement, just like we did the olive crusher arms. So you want to go through leg by leg and determine what frame you want that leg's movement to start on. So right now they're all starting at the same frame and ending at the same frame, and it gives us this real mechanical kind of movement where they all move in unison. So I'm going to select the first symbol and make sure that you tap on it on the stage. In your properties window, look for the looping feature, and you can just kind of scrub through and just find a range that looks good to you. So I might have this one start on frame 7, and then I'll select the next leg. And maybe have that one start on 12. We'll just see how it looks. I'm going to test this out. So they're all moving at different times, and I can live with that. That looks okay to me. So now I'm going to go back to the main stage. So once you have made the color effect adjustments and set the looping frame for each individual leg, then you're all set to go back to the main stage. If you look in your library window, you can see our new animated symbols. All right, so I think that we are finally at the stage where it's time to assemble the entire monster. So I wish I knew how to turn those little notifications off. Those things drive me crazy. I know if I would just Google it or spend like 2 minutes trying to figure it out, it's something really simple, but I just, instead, I just get frustrated with it. Okay, so I'm going to do this on the body layer. It really doesn't matter which layer you do it on, as long as you just have an empty layer that you can assemble this spider monster onto. So I'm going to grab the animated legs and drag that over. And I can drag another animated legs symbol over, or I can just copy and paste this one that's already on the stage. Does not matter. Either way, you're going to end up with the same duplicate instance of a symbol. And I need to flip this one. And so the way I flip things is just pretty easy. You just scale it. And I'm doing this with the free transform tool. So you'll notice in the tool window which tool I have highlighted. That's the tool that I'm using. And I'm just going to scale it in the opposite direction. And I'm just kind of flying by the seat of my pants. I'm just eyeballing it. When it looks like it's about the same, scale of the one on the left, the set of legs on the left, and that's when I'm going to call it fine, that it looks okay. And so now I have 2 sets of legs. Hit return and see them all moving at the same time. And now we're ready to bring over the monster body. So let's just drag that movie clip symbol over. And figure out where you want to place that monster. So I'm going to sit him kind of low so he covers up, you know, the bottom of the leg part of the monster. And I'm just going to test out how it looks when it's all assembled. However you choose to scale it is up to you. You know, it doesn't have to look exactly like mine, but just make sure that it, you know, makes a good visual connection or conduit, you know, between these 2 sets of legs, and just covers up, you know, the areas that might stick out. So now we have it all assembled. And now we're going to nest this animation into a symbol. And that's how we're going to wrestle this thing with its body and its 6 legs all into one symbol and have it behave like a grouped object that's fully animated. So we'll do it the same way we've done the rest of the animated symbols. We're just going to select that animation in the timeline by holding the Shift key down, selecting the first keyframe and the very last frame. And then you're going to right-click or press Control on the keyboard and click anywhere in those selected frames. And you're going to cut those frames from the stage. And then you'll go to Insert, New Symbol. This also will be a graphic symbol. And we're going to call it Animated Spider. And then click OK. And then the last thing we're going to do is paste that animation into this new symbols timeline. So just Control click or right click on the very first blank keyframe and choose Paste Frames. And there we have it. It's all animated. Once that's done, then you can just go back to the main stage. And now it is time to animate the spider connected to its web. And we're going to animate the swinging movement of that web. So on any of these blank layers, it doesn't matter which one, but you're just going to pick one blank layer and assemble the web with the spider at the bottom. So we'll place the web segments, and I think that I usually use probably 4, if I remember correctly. Let me zoom in a little bit. I think I just have to use the regular selection tool with this. It's such a skinny object that if I try to use the free transform, it's so sensitive that you might end up scaling the web or, you know, doing something you didn't mean to do. So just use the basic selection tool for grabbing the web segments. I'm going to assemble 4 of them and put them just end to end. Now if you look closely, and this is kind of helpful to know, there is a little dividing line indicator to let you know where one web ends and another segment begins. And so just be mindful of that, because if you'll remember how we animated the vine in the jungle scene, we started at the top part of each segment and connected it to the top part of the next segment. So we'll want to do the same thing with this web. I'm going to zoom out so I can see a little bit better what's going on. And drag over another web segment. Just stack them. Yep. Because we want it to have a free-flowing, organic, you know, undulating kind of movement. And so that's why we have so many segments. And we'll connect all those together with a bone structure and then apply damping and spring and all that. Or strength and damping to the spring to make it more of a fluid kind of motion. And you want to make sure that your web is placed just at the top and maybe the centermost part of the stage. Then my very last segment will be the animated spider. So I'll drag that guy over, and it needs to be scaled down quite a bit. When you scale, hold the shift key down so you'll keep the proportions constrained, and then just place that at the very bottom of the last web segment. And I'm going to go ahead and scale down the shadow to what I think would be about the approximate size of that shadow. And place it right under. How's everybody doing so far? Everybody doing okay? Yeah, when you first drag the animated spider symbol over, it will be really big. So you'll need to scale it down and then place it at the bottom of the web. We want this to look like it's dangling off in the distance.
Question.
Yes.
Did you make I was trying to finish making it up. Did you make the web in a symbol, or did you make the web on the actual frame?
Oh, so I assembled the web in the main stage. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And then I dragged the animated spider over and made that the last segment, of the whole web, shape or form or whatever object. And then we'll attach a bone structure to all this so that all of this will be articulated together, piece by piece, with the spider being the last part of it.
So
that's how we'll get the spider to swing with the web. It's just going to be a continuation of that web bone structure.
So it's all in one layer?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It's all in one layer. Yes. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apply the bone structure. So I'm going to connect all of these pieces together. So each web segment all the way down to the spider so that all these sections are connected. And you might want to zoom in for this, just so you can look for those dividing lines on the web segment. Like I'm looking for mine and I don't see those lines. There we go. I just selected it using the free transform tool, and so that shows me where the end point is of one of these segments. Then I'll grab the bone tool. I can see the line right there where one segment ends and the next one begins. So I'm going to start my bone application at the top of this web segment and drag it just to the top of the very next web segment. So those two are now connected. Then I'll scroll up a little bit and I see the second dividing line. It's very faint, but I can see it. My cursor is right next to it. So I'm just going to pick up where I left off on the previous bone, click and drag, and continue that to the very next web segment, just like that. And then I'm going to scroll down and look for the next segment. So there's the dividing line. And I will continue this bone from that point to this point. So the top of the next web segment. And then the very last attachment is going to be from the top of this web segment all the way down to the monster. And now these are all connected. Yep, so like you see here, I have a bone structure attached to each web segment, or the bones are attaching each web segment together. And then the final bone attaches the last web segment to the spider monster. And so now if I want to lift it or reset its pose, you can see it's all attached. And the legs are still fully functional. Yes. Okay, so in this next part, we are going to animate the swinging motion of the spider monster, and we will also animate the shadow moving with it. So to do that, we're going to need more than 15 frames of animation. So let's go ahead and extend ourselves some frames in the timeline. I think I'll come up to maybe frame 250 and just hit F5. So we're just extending everything. And to be honest, I don't know that we need to extend the armature frame out that far. Because what we're going to do is we're going to set the poses for this swinging spider web the same way we did with the jungle scene. So what we want is for the spider to kind of start in this upward position, swing down, and then slowly swing to a stop. And then once it swings to a stop, the spider's just going to hang out there at the bottom of the web for a second, moving its little legs around. And then it's going to detach and drop to the ground and become in closer contact with the shadow beneath it. So everything I just described is going to take place across more than one layer. So we're going to animate the swinging motion and swinging to a stop on one layer, and then the shadow obviously on its own layer, and then the detaching of the spider from the web on its own layer. So if you'll remember earlier on in the semester, when we were learning about frame by frame animation, we also experimented with how to make an object move between layers to create a sense of depth. And we had that fish swim in front of and then behind the plant, if you'll remember. So this is kind of similar to that. So we're going to create the illusion that all this is happening, all in the same layer. But really, when the spider detaches, its visibility is actually going to pick up on a whole separate layer. And the visibility of the spider attached to the web will stop. And then we'll create another layer just for the web to be visible but no longer animated. So that's how we'll create that separation between the spider and the web. So first things first. Let's animate the spider swinging. And I'm also going to try shortening this layer. Yep, to maybe frame 160. So we're going to make all of this happen. I'm letting it play out. And then at whatever desired frame, the visibility of that whole structure will discontinue. So I'm going to make this even shorter. Let's see. And I'm shortening this visibility just by placing my cursor over, kind of straddling the last frame, and the next empty frame. And that's how you get that little scaling icon. And when you have that visible, then you can click and drag and shorten the visibility of that layer. So I'm going to have this visible until, let's just say, frame 100. I think that'll be plenty of room to create the swinging motion. And if we need more frames, we can extend it. But I think 100 will be just fine. So once you've set up the swinging spider's timeline, then you're ready to set the poses. So the first pose is going to be with the spider and the web up in this motion or this position right up here. And at the first frame. Then I'll bring the playhead out to about frame 30, and I'm going to select the spider and its web by the top bone structure and just bring it straight down. So we have this kind of motion going now, just like we did with the vine. And let's go ahead and do the same thing with the shadow. So I'm going to try and animate the shadow. Let's see if I can do this with a classic tween. Let's apply a classic tween to this. Now it is a movie clip symbol. Okay. It'll tell you if it has to convert it to a different type of symbol. A classic tween. I'm going to do this with a classic tween. So I've applied a classic tween to the shadow layer. Notice that I have a dotted line, so that just means that the classic tween has been applied, it's ready to go, but we just haven't animated anything yet. So I'm going to bring the playhead all the way back to the beginning, and where this first keyframe is for the shadow, I'm going to select the shadow. I'm going to hold the shift key down as I move the shadow, just like that. And then I'm going to bring the playhead out to where the next pose is for the spider. And I'm going to create a keyframe right there in my classic tween layer. So hit F6, hold the shift key down and move the shadow beneath the spider. The reason why I'm holding the shift key down is so that I can just glide that shadow right across at the same XY level without it moving up or down. And so we want to keep it at that same Y level as we scoot it across. And holding the shift key down will allow you to do that. So let's make sure that these two objects are moving in sync, and they look pretty good. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add the properties of strength and damping under spring. So I'm just kind of selected somewhere in this part of the timeline. Go down the row or column and just start setting some percentages. So we got a little bit of that swing in motion. Comes down just like a broom handle. We'll fix that. We'll add some ease to that. But let's work our way down this bone structure and add spring, strength, and damping to each of these bone structures. So I'm not quite going to 100. I'm going to around the 70, low 70 range, mid 70 range. You can always go back and change those if you feel like you need to. And I'm going to test this out. So we've got a nice swinging motion here. And then the visibility stops. And I kind of like the way it just drops from the top. It's not real fast, but I think that'll work for me. So the next thing I'm going to do is make sure that the shadow kind of follows along. So now I'm going to focus my attention on the shadow and just scrub through to watch the movement of the spider. So once it makes one sweeping motion, this is kind of reminiscent of knowing when to set keyframes for the giraffe legs. We want to look for sweeping motions and where one ends and another one begins. So this is where the spider carries on in this one direction and is getting ready to swing in the opposite direction. So this would be a good place for a keyframe and then repositioning of the shadow. Hold the shift key down when you do this. And then I'm going to drag the playhead back in the opposite direction, find that next sweeping motion. And that's a good place for another keyframe. And now I will hold the shift key down and move this to be beneath the spider. I'll test out my animation. So to get access to the spring, you want to make sure that you have selected the bone structure. So when you see that it's highlighted, then you should be able to see the spring options in the properties window. Yes. And I think after this last keyframe for the shadow, I think I'm going to remove the frames after that because that shadow is going to be on its own new layer. So I'll hold the shift key down and just select right after that last keyframe and make sure that all of everything after that is highlighted. I'll control click, and actually I think I just need to remove the frames. I did clear frames, but I should have just removed them. And I'm going to lock these layers. And create 3 more layers. So I'll just hit this new layer button 3 times. Or actually one of these is already empty, so I think that's an empty layer. Yep. So one of these I can just repurpose. It's an old armature layer where we cut the animation and pasted it into a symbol previously. So I'm going to name one of these layers shadow. I'm going to name one spider. And one web. And on those layers, I'm going to drag my playhead all the way to where the visibility stops from the scene that you see right now. And I'm going to create new keyframes in the column of frames right after the visibility ends. So just like this. And what we're going to do is we're going to use our onion skin feature. Remember that? We looked at that much earlier on in the semester. And that was a feature that allows you to see content on frames within the timeline, frames before and after the frame that you have selected in the timeline. And that is what we're going to use as a guide to follow, a template or a blueprint, however you want to look at it, to reassemble the web, the spider, and the shadow on their new layers. And that's how we're going to create that seamless transition of the spider swinging from the web and then stopping and then dropping to the ground and scampering into the foreground. So let's go ahead and turn on our onion skin. And I'm going to, I don't know why it's not showing me. Oh, it's because my layers were locked. Unlock your layers so you can see the last position of all of these components. And what you're going to do is you're going to go through each named layer, and for the web layer you're going to reassemble the leg. I'm sorry, the web. I don't know why that word just popped out of my mouth. So I'm going to drag the web segment over and just align it over the previous leg or web. Golly, I keep wanting to call that a leg. And it doesn't have to be exactly perfect because remember, this is going from an animated state to a still state. So if it just comes straight down, that's fine because that's really where the web needs, or how it needs to be posed anyway when the spider drops to the ground. So it looks like I have one more web segment maybe. And don't be afraid to zoom in to make sure you have these really end to end. So mine were not. I'm going to go back and fix that. And now I won't need this last symbol. I'll drag over the animated spider. Whoa. Let's scale that down. And I put it on the wrong layer, but that's not a problem. I can just cut it from this layer. And paste it onto the spider layer. And make sure that you paste it in at that blank keyframe. And then scale it down. Let's turn our attention to the onion skin again. So I'll turn the visibility back on I'll select my spider on its own new layer, and I'm just scaling it down to get it close to what the previous spider is. So it needs to be scaled down just a little bit more. And place it over, or just, you know, stack it. If it looks like it's pretty close to that range, then you're good to go. So I'm going to turn off the onion skin for a moment. Ooh, goodness. I'm going to scoot that into place. Let's just see what we have here. So I think it needs to be scaled down just a tiny bit, because I can see it's kind of getting larger in that one keyframe. And now let's do this again. So we just want it to look like it's swinging to a stop, and then it just stops. And that's where the spider is going to start to drop from the web to the ground. Oops, didn't mean to zoom out that much. And now let's get our shadow visible. So I'm going to turn on that onion skin again just for a second so I can see where the shadow is on the previous layer. We're going to use that as a guide to know where to place the shadow on its new layer. Oops, I placed it on the wrong layer. Make sure you have the shadow layer selected at its blank keyframe, and then drag the shadow over. And you'll need to do some scaling probably. And place it right over the old one. Now let's turn off our onion skin and make sure that that also looks pretty seamless. So I need to scale it down just a little bit more. You can see right there's a little bit of a popping where it scales up a tad. And if you really want to be precise about this, because I'm just kind of, you know, eyeballing it, but you can get the exact scaling size by looking in the properties when you scale it down. There are width and height properties, so you could just check the width and height properties of the previous state of that shadow and then dial in those numbers for the shadow on the new layer. And same thing with the monster too. Okay, so now we're ready to create the illusion of the flower, or all the wrong words keep popping out of my mouth. What is wrong with me? Now we're going to create the illusion of the spider detaching and dropping to the ground. So we will do that on the spider layer. So I think we could do this. I'm trying to decide if I want to do this with a classic tween or a motion tween. Let's try it with a motion tween. So I'm going to select my spider layer and control click. Well, let's do classic tween. We could convert that symbol to what it needs to be converted to make it a motion tween, but let's try a classic tween. So we're going to let it hang out for a minute and let it just kind of dangle with its legs moving. And then about, I don't know, maybe frame 130, somewhere in there, we'll place a keyframe. And then I'm going to come out in the timeline a little bit further, maybe frame 200, create a keyframe. Actually, this is the keyframe for where it dangles. Then from here to someplace else, it's going to drop. So let's place another keyframe. It'll drop pretty fast. So let's just go to 140, create a keyframe there, and then let's drop it. let's see what kind of movement we have there. All right, so now it's dropped to the ground. And unfortunately, these keyframes remember the placement of the spider previously. So I'm just going to delete these keyframes, clear keyframe, and make sure there's no others. And then we're just going to create a keyframe further down the timeline. Maybe frame 205, something like that. You can always move these keyframes around. Create a keyframe, and then move the spider into the foreground, and then also scale it up. So there we go. And we're going to do the same thing with the shadow. So I go to my shadow layer, back up the playhead. Let's add a classic tween to the shadow layer. Let's go to the next keyframe. In the above layer, I'll set a keyframe there. And I'll set another keyframe here. And at this keyframe, I think I would like for this shadow to get darker. I don't see the color effect. I'll have to come back to that. And then move the shadow into the foreground. So line up the keyframes again, or create a new keyframe right beneath the previous one. And move the shadow to the foreground and scale it up. Oops, grab the wrong thing. Oh. And I got to figure out how to get that shadow to get darker. I'll have to experiment with that. You want it to get larger and darker once the spider makes contact with it. And that's it. I mean, there's a lot of things I could go back and kind of fine tune to, you know, kind of smooth things out or sync things up a little bit better. But that's the gist of it, how you would animate this scene. So that's it for this demonstration. And next week is a work week, so if you're still working on this, that's fine. If everybody's finished by next week, then we'll just start another little fun exploration of other things that we can do and animate that we, you know, have time to explore, since we finished everything so early. So that's it for today, you guys.